Please welcome Josh Kornbluth.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to see that most people are leaving the room now. Just where I went up, I was standing out there with my little pile of books. I brought my own memoir with me, and then people come by and go, "Is this the free book?" And I was like, "Well, no, it's $10, which is, it's a good price." And says, "Oh, thanks." So, anyhow, it's really wonderful to follow Ken. I'm feeling like it's really great I'm so much less accomplished than he is, that I feel like it's going to ease you back out into the world. I want to talk to you a little bit about some stuff that unbelievably I got to learn about empathy and the brain, and I just wanted to share that with you. I also wanted to say that my wife and I have not gotten married every year, but our first date was in 1992 was on Groundhog's Day, and so every year on Groundhog Day, the tradition is when she wakes up, if she sees my shadow, she has to stay with me for another year. So I made it up. I made up that tradition. So anyhow, I thought I wasn't going to sell my. Can you hear me? Is it cool? I feel like I'm yelling, but I have a microphone, and it's all just weird. Okay. And I was also very moved by Ken. That was just a beautiful, beautiful talk. So anyhow, I'm just sort of taking it all in. But anyhow, yes. So I was telling my book, which is called Red Diaper Baby, which is my first solo show, autobiographical monologue that I did in New York. And I was worried because no one was buying it. And then this guy named Peter bought them all. So talk to Peter, and he can show you the book. But just in case you don't read the book or see it, this is how my show opened. It opened back in 1992. It began like this. My father, Paul Kornbluth, was a communist. He believed there was going to be a violent communist revolution in this country and that I was going to lead it. Just so you get a sense of the pressure. So anyhow, that's the opening of Red Diaper Baby. My father was a communist. My mother was a communist. The only thing that they agreed on was their politics and that I would lead the revolution, and they divorced when I was a baby. And the way I got into learning about the brain was because my mom never had fallen in love. She wasn't in love with my dad, and unfortunately. She was very beautiful, had a lot of boyfriends and stuff, never fell in love, and I wanted her to be in love because I loved her so much. I lost her earlier this year. And I loved her very, very much. And then I sort of thought, well, maybe it just won't happen. Sometimes you wish things and it won't happen. Maybe my mom will never experience love. And then in her late 70s, a man named Frank Rosen came into her life. Frank Rosen was a retired union organizer in Chicago and an electrician. He was with the UE, the United Electrical Workers Union, a really great union. And like my mom, Frank Rosen was a communist. For years, Frank had been married to a lovely communist woman named Lois Ann, and then tragically she got cancer and she died. And then after a suitable period of mourning, Frank decided he wanted to find a new communist wife. So he went around Chicago to try to find a suitable woman to be his new wife, who had to be a communist because that's what he was, and he couldn't find it. So he placed an ad in the Nation magazine, very progressive magazine, in the personal section. Communist widower, mid-80s, seeks communist woman, 70 to 120, for hopefully long-term relationship. And he was flooded with responses. Flooded. He got from all over the country. It turns out, at least at that time, if you were a communist widower, it was a seller's market. So he got all these responses, including my mom's, and then to all the women who sent in their responses, Frank sent back out to them essentially an 11.5 single-spaced exam to quiz them on their exact ideology. And my mother aced it. And not just the multiple choice section, but also the essays, which were very hard and were graded on a curve. So now my mom was the chosen one, and all that was left to do was for Frank and my mom, Buddy, to meet. And Frank came to New York. He never left Chicago, and he hated New York, but he loved my mom. And my mom went to Chicago. She never left New York to that point in her life. And she liked Chicago, and she loved Frank. And my mother, for the first time in her life, she fell in love. They fell in love. And my mom moved to Chicago, and they got married. And just in case you don't believe that this love was passionate, let me tell you something. In order for my mom to move from New York to Chicago to be with Frank, she had to give up her rent-controlled apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. 99th and West End. So that's love. Don't give me your Romeo and Juliet. That is weak sauce compared to Frank and Buddy. So my mom moved to Chicago, and then Chicago, they had this beautiful apartment on the south side of Chicago with picture windows overlooking Lake Michigan. And it was just so beautiful. My wife and son visited from Berkeley to see my mom doting on someone. And he was doting on her. They were doing mutual doting. It was a communist fairy tale. But then after several years of this beautiful life together, Frank got sick. He got a flu or something. And then when he recovered from the flu, he didn't come back to his full self. He was forgetting things, words, names, faces, and he wasn't himself. This was a retired, you wouldn't know he was retired as a union organizer. He'd be on the phone all the time and on the treadmill, giving advice. But now he would just sit there on the couch. And so eventually they brought him in to the doctor. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I was getting these reports from my mom, not from my mom, who would never admit anything, but from Frank's son, who's my age. His name is Carl. He's my age, he's Frank's son, he's in the union like Frank. And like me, Carl was raised by communists. So I've always kind of wondered, why is it Carl with a C? I'll ask him one day. Anyhow, I'm getting these reports from Carl with a C, and things are getting worse and worse in Chicago, and I'm thinking, I need to do something. I need to be, so how can I help? Which is how I found myself in the office of Dr. Bruce Miller, who at the UCSF's Memory and Aging Center. Now, the Memory and Aging Center, or MAC, at UCSF, it's renowned for their work in dementia. People come to there from all over the world. And my thinking was that maybe I could apply there to get a gig as a visiting artist. But it turns out that Bruce Miller had seen my work, which always makes me feel great. And he said, Josh, how can I help you? I said, well, can I apply to be a visiting artist? He said, well, Josh, you could, but go bigger. Because we're just starting this brand new thing. It's called the Global Brain Health Institute, GBHI. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring in people from all over the world to be fellows for a year at the Global Brain Health Institute. You'll be immersed in brain science and brain health, and then you'll go back out and change the world. And I said, Bruce, I have to tell you, this sounds fantastic, but I should really admit to you that back in college, I was really bad at science. He said, Josh, I know, I saw that show of yours. And he said, and Josh, what I'm telling you is we already have plenty of scientists coming in to be fellows. We need artists, storytellers like you. I said, okay, well, Bruce, but then I should also tell you that the stories that I end up telling tend to be about how I was supposed to lead a communist revolution. He said, I know, Josh, I saw that show of yours too. But what I'm saying is come be part of our revolution in brain science. And Josh, this is a big deal. In fact, well, it's full-time, and of course, there's a stipend. And I wasn't going to bring that up. I mean, that'd be sort of crass to give a stipend. But it did tickle. I released endorphins. I did. And it's not like I was broke, or anything. My wife is a public school teacher. So I married into money. But it did occur to me that with my mom and her husband Frank in these dire straits, that now maybe I could use a few extra bucks. And so then, sure enough, a few months later, I found myself beginning my year as a fellow at the Global Brain Health Institute. And as it happens, this was just 4 days after the inauguration of Donald Trump, 3 days after the Women's March in Oakland that my wife and I went to. And so I was just all over the place, as I think we all were at that time, politically. And I'm sitting there at my first meeting with all these brain doctors. The first meeting, it's called the patient review, and they're talking about their sort of difficult cases, and they put up their brain scans. And I'm listening. It's my first day as a brain fellow. I didn't know anything. It all just sounds like gobbledygook to me. But after a while, I picked up on a couple of things. And one was that the brain scan that we were all looking at, that on this brain scan, the dark splotches, that these were what are those blockages called? The what? Oh, you're saying the amyloids, but they're the, what's the word? I'm having an aged moment now. The blockages. This is great. But you know, these blockages, they were cutting off communication between different parts of the brain. So that was one thing that I picked up on. The other thing I picked up on was the name of the patient whose scan we were looking at, because it was really easy to see, because it was just right at the top of the scan. So I could see that the name of this patient was Mr. Brain. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's sort of weird. That my first day as a brain fellow, my first day at a brain institute, the first brain I'm looking at belongs to a guy named Mr. Brain. And I sort of was chuckling to myself, and Dr. Bruce Miller said, well, Josh, what are you chuckling about? I said, well, you know, this patient named Mr. I can't imagine you guys get that many patients in this brain place named Mr. Brain. What are the odds? And instead of answering me, Dr. Miller said, well, let's just move on to the next patient. And the next patient was a 74-year-old man, also named Mr. Brain. And the patient after that was a 57-year-old left-handed woman, also named Mr. Brain. And this is when one of my fellow fellows, named Jorge, leaned over and he whispered to me that actually what MR Brain stood for was magnetic resonance brain. It just meant these were all MRIs of brains. So in a way, though, in what sense these were all Mr. Brain, which is kind of cool. So I'm staring at these brain scans, right, and I'm trying to find meaning in them. At the same time, I'm thinking about all of these political maps I've been seeing on CNN. And in that moment, I had a vision that what I was looking at was not a brain scan. What I was looking at was a political map of the United States. And I saw all those blockages as blockages between different parts of our population that couldn't talk to each other. And I thought, my God, does the United States have dementia? And I brought that idea with me into my first meeting with my mentor, Dr. Bruce Miller, because we had to work on a big project. And I said, I want to work on a project about this big brain that I'm seeing, our collective brain, our political brain, what I started to call our citizen brain. And that's when he told me about what he was working on, or the main kind of dementia that he was working on, which is called frontotemporal dementia. You may have heard of it, FTD. It's like Bruce Willis was diagnosed with it fairly recently. The thing about FTD is, unlike with Alzheimer's, that with FTD patients, that they tend to not lose their memory. What they lose is their empathy. And he told me about these patients who all of a sudden they're the salt of the earth. And then all of a sudden, they don't care about people. They don't feel this empathy for other people. And it's this awful disease. But because of this disease, brain scientists like Dr. Miller had this idea. What if we compare the brain scans of people with this disease, where they lose empathy, FTD, and compare them with scans of people with normal, healthy brains? And when they did that, they saw this huge difference. The people with healthy brains had this circuit that was all lit up. And then in the people with FTD, with frontotemporal dementia, that very same circuit in their brain scans literally had turned off. It had gone dark, it had died. And then it occurred to me, what if our problem is that in our country, in our citizen brain, our empathy circuit has died? And how who could possibly fix it. So I decided that my project was going to be to try to lead a revolution of empathy, a peaceful revolution of empathy. But I needed to figure out a few things. And so I asked Bruce Miller one day, I said, this is a key to me, is it possible to increase one's empathy circuit, to strengthen it? And instead of answering me, he did this thing, because there are brilliant people all around at UCSF. He'll just wave in someone to answer you. So you ask him a question, he'll go, excuse me, line is calling, could you just come in here and answer Josh's question? This question on vitamin C. So in this case, he called in this woman named Virginia Sturm, an amazing neuroscientist who focuses on emotion in the brain. And he said, Josh here has a question. And I said, yes. Is there a way we can increase our empathy circuit? Can we all individually increase the power of our empathy circuit? And she told me, as a matter of fact, Josh, I just was telling Bruce, I came up with an exercise for how we can all strengthen our empathy circuits. And I want to tell you guys this exercise. But instead of just telling you about it, just step by step, I want to tell you the story of what happened to me the first time I tried it, okay? So I live in Berkeley, and I was bicycling north up Milvia Street in Berkeley, and I was preparing to make a left turn on my bike. So I signaled, and then, oh yeah, that's so cute. Okay, so I signaled, and I went into the middle lane, right? And I signaled beautifully, and I thought I had executed this maneuver perfectly. This, however, was not the opinion of the driver of the car that was behind me, and he's honking at me, and honking at me, and honking at me, and then the light turns green. I don't even have a chance to turn left around the corner. This guy zooms past me, almost hits me, and then when the driver was halfway down the next block, he rolls down his window, and he leans and he yells back at me that I should do something to myself. Something that, as it happens, I cannot physically do. I have short hamstrings. So being a New Yorker, usually my New Yorkerness would come out, and I go, oh yeah, rah, rah, rah. But I remembered that Virginia just taught me this exercise. So I decided to do it. And this is the first thing you do in that exercise. You take a deep, when someone does something mean to you, says something mean to you, you take a deep breath. If necessary, take another deep breath. And then you try your best to imagine why this person did that thing to you. So in my case, I made up this story. This guy, he just found out his own kid is dangling from a building that's engulfed in flames. And he's the only one who can save him. If you're in that situation, you'll do anything, right? You'll be irrational, you might yell anything. Of course, I never found out why he yelled at me, and usually we won't. But that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is that we do the work. We do the work of making that imaginative leap into the perspective of someone else. In the classic definition of empathy, it's you imagine what it might be like to walk in someone else's shoes. And it turns out that each time you do that, each time, your empathy circuit gets stronger, measurably stronger. I said to Virginia, this is fantastic. This is bringing me so much closer to my project. But I have one more question, if I can just follow up. Is it possible for empathy to travel from one person to other people? She said, oh, yes, Josh, absolutely. In fact, there's a term for that. It's called emotional contagion. So, emotional contagion, like imagine you're in a hospital and you're looking in at a ward of newborn babies, right? And the baby right in the middle of that ward starts crying. And then all the other babies start crying. Why have all the other babies started crying? Well, they're not crying because they're a presidential candidate and they're facing 91 federal counts for including keeping secret documents in their toilets, in their retirement. No, that's not where they're crying. They're crying because they caught this emotion through emotional contagion. And I said, well, Virginia, that's it. I think I have it. And I said, Bruce, this is what I want to do. I want to take Virginia's exercise and teach it wherever I perform. And I want to teach it to other people. And I want to start in my project by teaching everyone in Berkeley, where I live, how to strengthen their empathy circuit. And Bruce said, Josh, go bigger. I said, okay. The whole East Bay. I'm gonna go around the whole East Bay. I'm gonna get everyone all around the East Bay to straighten their empathy ratings. He said, Josh, go bigger. I said, okay, the entire state of California, from the northern tip all the way down to the politically somewhat dicey Central Valley, down into the southern area. He kept going, no, Josh, go bigger, go bigger, go bigger. Till finally I went, okay, Bruce, this is what I'm gonna do. I am gonna lead a peaceful, worldwide revolution of empathy. And he said, and Dr. Bruce Phillips said, now that's big. By the way, atrophy, that was the word I was trying to think of before. Okay, cool. I'm just happy for my old brain. Now it's back in there. So, this is my project, and my project, what it turned out to be is, I decided I'm gonna go bigger, even than talking to people in the theater, I'm gonna make videos. And so I have made a series of videos. I think I have like a minute or so? Yeah. So, I'm making a series of videos, they're called Citizen Brain. They're at citizenbrain.org. So far, there are 6 of them. 500,000 people have viewed them so far, which is really cool. And it can't all be my family. There's just not that many of us. And they're on all these different subjects. There's one on the empathy circuit, which I believe has been used in someone's class, in someone's talk. There's one on aging versus ageism, a subject that is very close to all our hearts, that has been raised already on this stage. There's one about loneliness. Loneliness, which is such a huge thing. My mom, who was in the home with Frank, and then after Frank passed by herself, so many people were dealing with not being able to connect. And whoa, what an effect it has. What an effect it has on people. So there's a video about loneliness. There's a video about the right brain, the side of the brain, and the left side of the brain. Neither side of mine is super developed, but there's about certainty versus uncertainty, and they're all there at citizenbrain.org, and they're free, unlike my book, which was purchased by Peter, and it's just so beautiful that he did that. And I hope that you get a chance to watch them and to share them. So thank you very much.